Hello, everyone. I think this is on. There we go. Okay, so we're going to be talking about augmented reality. I'll set up the panel a little bit for you. Obviously, AR has been around a long time. The concepts, of course, have been known for years. Some of the technologies have been kind of nailed down for a while, but we're starting to see a little bit of an inflection point now in AR, and we're here to discuss why. So we've got a few people on stage. First, we have Cyan Banister, Founders Fund, investor, obviously. We have next up Ross Finman, Deanna Hu of Escher Reality. They're building the sort of back-end tools that go beyond just AR tracking. And then, of course, we have Phil Keslin down at the end, who's the CTO of Niantic, which has arguably built one of the largest AR systems ever with Niantic and then Pokemon Go. And then we have with us Nathan Kong as well of CurioPets, who's building consumer applications for AR that focus on social aspects. So the reason I put this particular panel together is because I think we have a different perspectives across the spectrum of AR. We'll talk about it a little bit, hopefully give you guys some insight, and hope you enjoy. So let's go into it. All right, so augmented reality has been around for years. Why is it exploding now? Does anybody want to take a first stab?
I guess I can get started on that. So if you think about the technology associated with it, it's been developing a lot in the academic space, but then the hardware on mobile devices has gotten fast enough and good enough to be able to run some of the very advanced algorithms that you can run today. So it's very, very advanced computer vision work. So on top of that, like with kind of Pokemon Go bringing the first step of AR in terms of like quick mobile experiences, it's made it that it's a lot more common for people to go out there and experience it from a social standpoint.
I agree. I think furthermore, especially with Pokemon Go, that you're taking the combination of a novel technology and with a rather new type of gameplay, and then you're combining that with a very well-known nostalgic brand. And I think that gets the idea of AR into the masses and something that they can actually play with. I think that's really important.
So we talk about Pokemon as a watershed moment, so talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think in the case of Pokemon Go was getting people outside playing a game together. That was the motivator for a lot of people that played our game. And putting Pokemon in the real world, that was sort of the dream of Pokemon from the beginning. If you talk to anybody at the Pokemon company, they created a virtual world that looked very similar to the real world because Pokemon exists right next to us, right? So getting that shared experience, putting Pokemon in the real world, captivating people's desire to have Pokemon in the real world, and exercise, that motivates people a lot. I mean, you get out and walk around with people, it makes you feel good. So I think that helped a lot. I think AR was a piece of that. I don't know that it was the core element, but it helped make Pokemon real.
And so if we're looking at the things that are happening in AR right now that are sort of kicking off a lot of the conversation about it, obviously Apple is launching ARKit tomorrow with iOS 11. I think it launches tomorrow, whenever it launches. And then Google's AR Core, of course, has been announced. So why are these frameworks, why are these systems such a big deal for AR at this point?
Well, I can answer that one too. It's on millions and millions of devices. It's something that most people don't have, right? I mean, iOS 11 launches, you got 200 million devices that it can be run on tomorrow. That's pretty significant. And the API, the SDK is relatively simplistic to use. I'm sure it's not the end all, but it allows people to experiment in ways that they never experimented before.
And so, Ross and Diana, you guys are working on a system that takes where ARKit kind of stops and then starts there and moves beyond that. So can you talk a little bit about like the limitations of a system like ARKit or ARCore, which is very similar?
Correct. So with ARCore and ARKit, it's all about just the phone experience. It can only do the tracking. So tracking means just overlaying and doing the 6 degrees of freedom. But now the analogy is that that's just sort of the front end. It's just the visualization. Now when you need to start building more compelling and interesting experiences, you really need to start keeping state. So that means building a backend. And this backend is different than backends in the past for web, because you need to manage the AR data, which is specific with computer vision, which is what we're doing in our company.
So like ARKit may give you an in-session great tracking in a particular session, but then going from one session to another, closing the app and then reopening it to maintain that sense of place and presence and persistence, you need other systems on top of that.
Right. So remembering, let's say, if you are building, let's say, a farm build app and you have farms of carrot, you exit the app with ARKit, you cannot come back and have the same state. So that's one thing that ARKit cannot provide you. The other thing is that what if you want to share the experience with multiple people or friends, or have the concept of hyperlocal shared multiplayer AR, is having people, 2 phones or multiple of them, seeing the same reality. That's not possible with ARKit or ARCore.
Right.
So we make that possible.
Got it. And Nathan, your CurioPets is a sort of a virtual pet is the core of it, but you're working on some shared experiences, right?
Right. We think that CurioPets is more than just a game. It's a social app. It's a social experience. The idea is that you are traveling with your friends, exploring new areas, and what they're working on will definitely help achieve that as well, with being able to actually have a virtual item you can see in front of you, also viewable on your friends' phones. And I really think the biggest component about AR that makes it more valuable than that of VR is that, 1, you can transport it with you, but 2, you can actually have something that's more of social aspect. You can have something that multiple people can view with, interact with, and play with.
And so, obviously, Cyan, you see a lot of more of a cross section than any one person building a single thing. So, what have you seen that's very interesting to you in terms of AR and social? Anything standouts or standout types of experiences?
AR and social? Mm-hmm. Mostly just art experiments with people playing around with the platforms, but I think that one of the things is sort of a wayback machine of sort of what's happened around you. And so being able to look at a portal of the past, I think that's pretty neat, and it has some social elements to it. But I haven't seen anything super compelling yet, but I think it's just around the corner, or it's being developed and we just haven't seen it yet. I've seen some video chatting things that have popped up that are really promising, but they're still kind of on the down low. Mm-hmm. But most of the things that I'm excited about are actually enterprise AR.
And in what way? Like, why enterprise? Why is that such a focus?
Well, I think that being able to assemble something, there's a company called Scope AR. That's kind of when I had the epiphany when I was looking at that. I did a pump assembly without any sort of knowledge about what I was doing, and I didn't even have to have wearables. I just put the iPad above it, and then I assembled the pump, and I was like, wow, done. And so I think that it'll make work easier and training easier. It'll be a new way of learning things. And then I think at some point it'll be available to consumers, so you can do things like fix your printer and all of this sort of stuff through AR. So I think that's a natural extension of it, and I think it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think that I don't think anybody is too confused about that we're going to get a phase of AR that is very toy-based. Like, hey, look what we can do. Look what I can do, right? That's going to be our first wave of stuff, which is great.
It's like the early internet.
Yeah, exactly. That's the internet, right? And that platform experimentation then leads to like, oh, maybe if I put these two things together or whatever. But I'm very curious as to what you think this first wave of toys might look like, and this is for everybody. Like, do you think that the toys that we're going to be seeing are going to be revelatory, or do you think everybody's going to retread the app, the app boom? So the fart app of AR, is that a measuring tool or whatever,
Yeah, I think there will be lots of fart apps and measuring tools and things like that. It's just bound to happen, right? But, a lot of people, when Instagram came out, people were like, who needs a photo app with filters? Like, nobody. And Instagram was, it basically undersold. It's one of the most valuable properties that Facebook has. So we might see some things like that where people kind of look at it and be like, nobody needs that, but then it has extremely high viral growth.
So the other analogy is also in 2007 when Apple launched the iPhone, most of the first apps were just sort of flashlights. People didn't know what to do yet, and there's going to be this phase of learning. I mean, this is the genesis of the technology where people are experimenting now. A lot of times it's artists figuring out what to do. Then beyond that is the custom build, where people now are learning to crawl through how to build things, and then eventually becomes a product. So that's sort of the evolution where we're seeing. Right now we're past the genesis, we're in the custom build and making inwards into building products with it.
I think the great thing about enterprise is that the space is constrained, right? The problem space is very narrow. So you can build an application that works really well for that constrained space in a relatively short period of time. And it doesn't have to deal with, being outside and a lot of other things that really can complicate the situation. But as far as our apps and general consumer-based products, I think you're going to see a lot of crap over the next year to 2 or 3 years. But you'll see some little nuggets of really genuine, creative things that will spark something that will be really, truly amazing.
Well, to make any kind of really good, compelling, longer-term experience, like the development cycles for that are usually minimum 9 to 12 months. So like for people to be working on that. So like if you look at Made with ARKit, which absolutely love everything that goes up on there, but like some examples on there, like you don't need augmented reality to do tic-tac-toe. But the new thing is that it is an AR, and that's why it gets attention, that's why it gets views. But then as the novelty of that begins to die down, then you get into, okay, there's the art people who are figuring out what are the core dynamics. So then at least the way that we think about things is the new things are, one, the position of like, say, a phone, if you're talking about mobile AR, that matters. And second is the world becomes content that you can really bring into the experience. So then you can, like, that is the 2 really new things about AR. Plus you have like the uses of like tapping on a screen when it's in 3D. But once developers begin to understand those dynamics and build things that can only be used in that, that's when we're going to start to see like the next real wave of what's there. Because like an Uber, you can't really make an Uber style app for a phone like when it was on a PC. It only makes sense once the mobile platform comes out. Now is understanding what are the new things you can do with the mobile platform for AR.
And not only that, but like the canvas is different, right? Like a lot of people design for a screen, but all of this is a screen. And so I think people need to start thinking differently about how their apps are made and how the UX is going to completely change. And so like a lot of the demos I'm seeing is just like, oh, here's a facsimile of your computer screen right here in front of you, and here it is there. But like, why isn't my shoe part of my screen? Why isn't my hands? There's different ways to think about this.
And I think another really important aspect about AR is not just the visual component, but actually having your state of being where you are, your life actually interacting with this digital space. So as developers start to build more and more apps, I myself went through the same process when working on CurioPets. I found that just having a visual representation of an object on my phone into reality is not enough to surpass that sort of novelty barrier. You need to be able to, similarly to Pokemon Go, interact with your environment, have a location service actually work with the actual visual.
And there's also a lot of talk about AR from a very visual standpoint. Everybody associates AR with putting a thing on a thing, right? It's like, oh, I put a bird on it, right? That's AR. But I think that there's an interesting discussion to be had, maybe now and maybe obviously over the next few months and years. But there's an interesting discussion to be had about augmentation being done on several channels, multiple channels at once. Audio, obviously geospatial, right? So you're where you are. Audio, especially given now that wireless headphones are becoming more common. And then visual, and combining all of those things into an experience that alters your world. I think that thing on a thing is the phase 1. And then phase 2 is the thing, but different. Right, and I think that it will be an interesting transition from the way we see the world now to how to augment that. So I was curious if anybody is kind of thinking about what goes beyond placing a new thing and into the world of actually augmenting the thing that's there.
I at least view that the main thing with that is just time in terms of, well, one, the technology needs to take a little bit farther step beyond where it is now to begin to like augment and change the world. Like one of the cool things that a developer working with us did was like actually using colors of the world to affect the gameplay. So like we thought like, oh, digital pets, like that's probably going to be the first app, and then he thought about, oh, okay, you can actually take the color out of like a Coke can and that you can mine that resource, so then the game would change based off of the colors of your environment. And then like you want to go to like a different place, or you want more gold resources, you put up more post-it notes and mine the color from there. So I actually think like you can even begin to see the beginnings of that, but then as developers work with it, as you get beyond this kind of novelty lull of the new things, then I think you can see the next level of interactive experiences.
I think one of the examples that I've seen in this space, which is non-obvious, is that like Apple's portrait mode, or the new portrait lighting mode that they introduced, for instance. That's technically AR, right? It's taking an existing reality and augmenting it, layering on top of it, rather than replacing it entirely by, putting something new in its place. And I think that there's some enabling technologies that will get there. So I was curious, like the iPhone X, I'm sure everybody watched the announcement, and so that has a depth camera on it. That's new technology to a mobile phone. Obviously, been around for years in things like the Kinect and whatnot. Anybody have any thoughts about how the iPhone X might affect the course of AR development?
Well, at least for us on CurioPets, I think the facial recognition feature of the iPhone X is really interesting. One thing that we're trying to do besides just create a virtual object is have something that is a personality, a friend, companion. And so using the facial recognition feature, we can actually see, what are the emotions of the person that day, and we can have the pet respond accordingly. I think it's really important to actually combine the emotional aspect and the human level with the actual technology. So using this using machine learning plus a facial recognition software to have your pet respond and say if you're feeling sad, to basically cheer you up, I think that will really help bring the AR to make humans actually interact with the technology better.
So there's I think that there's a phase, right, obviously, where we're going to have AR on mobile, and that phase is going to last for a while. So what do you think is necessary in order to make a mobile experience compelling enough to get people to do this? Because this is a very physical act. Obviously, I think, Phil might have something to say about that, but getting people to hold the phone up and do this thing, what does it take to get over that threshold, over that hump, to get people to do that on a regular basis?
I can tell you from experience that people don't do that. People don't do this. It's very unnatural. It makes them look like a total doofus if they're doing it for an extended period of time. And so in Pokemon Go, the only time that they really use it is to share their encounter with the Pokemon. So to take that one picture, which is natural, and everybody takes it up, takes a picture, and then they're done. It's not walking around the world with their phone in front of their face. I don't think until we get to a place where we have something for visual AR, where you can put something on your face that's unobtrusive, that people don't know that you've got it on. That's, I think, for the visual part of it, that's going to be one of the biggest barriers. Audio is different. You can hide that. Most people walk around with their iPod ears stuck in their ears all the time, so nobody knows that they're being augmented then. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to happen, but there's a lot of growth.
At least for mobile, there's the trade-off of having hundreds of millions of potential market, which is why we're seeing a lot of other things, versus, you're probably not going to hold this up for 5 minutes. It's going to be, say, 2 to 5 minute experiences, say the under 15 seconds, that's kind of more a Snapchat realm. Beyond there is where you're going to start to see the mobile AR experiences that say 15 minutes to 2 minutes to maybe even 5 minutes. And what are the type of experiences you can have there? So getting to your original question of what would make an experience compelling enough, I view right now is just so early in the developer cycle. It's like predicting Angry Birds in 2007. It's will people really spend their time there and swipe? And then the trillions of hours that have been lost on that, or enjoy it.
I think sporting events and concerts, people hold up their phones. I can't tell you how many times I've been to a concert and you look out there and everybody's got their phones up. I mean, there's some people even here live streaming. And so I see one there. And so people do that when they're live streaming or taking photographs. And so I think that's behavior that is natural in those places. So if you could augment a sporting arena for esports or a concert and have dragons coming out of, all sorts of stuff, I think people would actually do that.
Right, piggybacking on an already existing behavior.
Correct.
Right. I think one of the apps that's sort of been teased out there is MLB. So MLB, the Major League Baseball, has their app. You point it at the field,
actually,
it'll show you players, right?
SKT in South Korea, they have a baseball stadium that they were doing that. They actually littered the whole place with Bluetooth beacons and Wi-Fi, and they were doing localized anybody who came into the facility that had an SKT-based plan could access the baseball layer. So they've been doing that for about a year now. And that's actually a pretty compelling experience. So you could hold it up to the scoreboard and it would give you additional information that wasn't on the scoreboard, or tell you about players who are on the field. So that kind of stuff has been there for a while. And I think it'll only get better.
Yeah, once you add hundreds of millions of potential customers to that, it starts to become...
And baseball's perfect for it because it's a stats game.
Right, exactly. Well, it's like exposing hidden information layers, right? Like that's one of the things about AR that it's super compelling, that's non-obvious, maybe not, will become obvious very quickly. Yep. Because I think that putting a thing on a thing is not the same as exposing more information about a thing. And when you mentioned head-mounted displays, so let's just talk about that a little bit. Right now we're obviously in the area of mobile, and will be for some time. What do you think the timeline is to head-mounted AR, and what do you think the challenges are?
Battery life.
Power.
Optics, actually.
Yes.
So this is one of the things that optics doesn't scale like Moore's law. There's things that people need to discover in physics. You can't make people go and discover physics faster. You can't do that. Like push more photons. It's not going to happen.
Well, that's especially true in the outdoor environment where you have a really big photon generator in the sky that's you got to overcome.
And what is it about the physics that's so hard in the optical region?
Well, part of it is, so technically, we know HoloLens has a very limited field of view. They could have built actually a bigger one, but the display would have ended up being this big because it's part of the technology of reflective light array field that they had that had limitations with that. And right now, people are still trying to figure out how to mimic the real world. I mean, if we think of how image comes into the human eye, it's really an infinite number of particles. And recreating that in a constrained discrete form, how do you do that? So there's this problem of how do you make light that's infinite discrete. So we've done it through computers. I mean, everything at the end is bits, and we still can represent infinity in numbers, but they're technically still discrete.
Right. And then, as Phil mentioned, you have to power it after that. So yeah, I can't wait to have my Mophie battery pack strapped to my ear. That's going to be great.
I've seen the VR backpack from HP now that strap that puppy on your back, but except make it a battery.
Right, right. Like 90% battery.
Well, they also have to look good. And not cause tension headaches and all sorts of things. People care a lot about their eyewear and what it looks like, and it's a fashion thing, and so I don't think people are willing to give that up to walk around with something that looks pretty goofy. I think, I forget, some glass company made these MP3 players that were built in. Yeah, Oakley. And those were kind of cool in the front, but really dumb looking on the side, and they just never caught on. And I think that we're a long ways off before somebody can make really small glasses of quality that are meaningful to anybody.
I mean, it's always dangerous to predict the future, but at least I would say to put numbers on it, probably 5 years out minimum for consumer style headsets, probably more in the order of like 5 to 10 years. But just in terms of shrinking down the technology, increasing the battery performance, everything else. But then with any type of technology, it's always a sign of success when kind of physics pushes back, but like it's working around all those little details because, example, to build off of what Diana said earlier, is like DSLR cameras are still the same size as they were like years ago. So then it's kind of like you can only shrink things so small when you need so many photons and then you need to transmit so much power. I mean, it will take a while, but like there's going to be billions of dollars spent to make it get to that point, and that'll be many years.
The thing that's exciting, though, when we get there, I think with mobile AR, a lot of the infrastructure will be built there. A lot of the things we need to figure out with the UX of what does it mean to build good AR, what does it mean to build something that people get engaged, it'll be there. So it'll be a nicer transition in a sense. We'll take a bit of the things to figure out right now, and even what we're building with the back end, it will be something that will just apply for headsets as well.
And I think it's really helpful is the fact that in the media and movies, TV shows, the way the AR is representative is from a glasses wear point of view. So I think having a lot of that artistic design for what the UI UX would look like, that's a little bit more ahead now than what the UI looks like right now for a phone, which has it's a very limited canvas space to view your entire world. So once we get to that step, I feel like the development will be much faster than the AR development on mobiles.
And that, one of the things you said too, Dana, that's actually kind of a hot button topic amongst AR, burgeoning or blooming AR developers that I've been talking to, is whether mobile experiences will translate at all to something like HMDs or head-mounted displays, or whether we're learning lessons now that won't be able to translate.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, there's a couple of things right now that we've been definitely working on is how do you speed up the development iteration cycle in AR. Like bugs in AR are very different than any kind of bug. Like we had this model that had 3 heads appearing. And it just looks cool, but it was a bug. So then how do you speed up? When you build an app, you kind of have to use the real world environment, and that's a very slow cycle to compile the code, and it takes 10 minutes to build an app and then see it. So what can we do to speed that up? And that will be the same problem for headsets. So there will be some learnings that will definitely apply, and there will be certain programming patterns that people will figure out and what are the best practices, and some won't apply. For example, the constraint in mobile AR, you are still constrained at the end in a 2D screen display. So the UX challenges in phone still apply, and you add the complexity of the 3D world. But the 3D world understanding and building apps on top of that, I think that will translate. And even the tools that people are building and all of that will be something that will be usable.
So the back end will be translatable, but interface-wise, translating a 2D interface to a 3D world is a lot different than 3D to 3D. Yeah. And then, so Nathan, you folks are launching tomorrow, right? The CurioPets is launching tomorrow. So how long did it take you from going, hey, we need to build this thing, to now did it take? And then, as far as I understand it, you were developing before ARKit and then integrated ARKit later on. So can you explain a little bit about that process?
Yeah, sure. So unlike what traditional developers have in terms of time length for building an app, rather than having 9 to 12 months, we had 9 to 10 weeks. The idea for CurioPets started about 10 weeks ago. We were actually working on another app for virtual reality when we had the idea of having a virtual pet. We quickly realized that this would be much better utilized in an AR sense, so we started working with Vuforia. We brainstormed the idea from...
And just to interject, Vuforia is a marker-based system.
Yes,
right?
correct. Vuforia is marker-based.
Place a marker on the ground, and then
yeah.
that gives you your tracking. And then ARKit, you don't need that.
Exactly, but when you have a marker, that kind of gets rid of part of the point of AR of having just one hardware device, easy to use, anywhere you can use it. But then from the point, we just had 10 weeks to basically ideate the app, brainstorm it, storyline it, and actually build everything. So the past 10 weeks have just been literally 24/7 working on building out the actual app. But one of the great things about when ARKit was released is that the system is not too difficult. And we were already familiar with working in Unity, which is the native engine we use. But actually adding the AR component wasn't the most difficult part. What was actually integrating the different features of an app. Just having something appear in front of you is not enough to keep you, it's not enough to retain you on the actual game. There needs to be a storyline. There needs to be some way to interact with others, and that multiplayer aspect is really what we ultimately put all our resources and energy into. But we believe that tomorrow when we launch the app, we'll hopefully see that people are starting to walk outside with not just with Pokemon Go, but also starting to look around with your pet and starting to interact with it.
Cool. And then as somebody who has a lot of experience scaling AR-like experiences, especially if you consider AR to be something that is social, what do you think that the impact of having all of these ARKit devices come online, and then of course whatever Google is able to facilitate will be, Phil?
Where do I think it's going to go?
What do you think the impact will be? Do you think there will be a gateway that opens, or do you think it'll be more of the same?
No. I think you'll see, I think content's got to show up. People got to figure out what content works. I think you'll see, I think I said earlier, you'll see a lot of garbage that shows up for a while. And I think we're going to go through a period where people get really disillusioned with AR, because especially now that it's everywhere, right? Everybody's got it on their phone. If the content doesn't really live up to people's expectations, then we have a serious drought in the future. But I think you could have a pretty, like I said, you're going to find those little bitty nuggets out there that really show you how to really take this new medium in a different direction. And until they find that, until people figure out what that looks like, it's going to be pretty challenging.
Like the early days of AR is kind of this double-edged, or there's two sides of the coin. Like one is for any developer that does figure it out, like it's a completely new market, completely new landscape. Like they have essentially a whole audience and that compelling content, but like it will take or if they don't find it, then it's kind of figuring it all out, because like the mobile market right now is fairly saturated. So that's why like a lot of people are looking at augmented reality as the new space in which to get something kind of big, different, and out there. But then it'll just be figuring out whoever gets those nuggets and then can get enough of them in a line, like it's going to really pay off for them. And it's just a question of like, what are the nuggets and in what time frame and who's going to be the one to do it.
Great. Okay, that's all the time we have. Hopefully you folks learned something. I enjoyed listening. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.